So, probably because of the role that I play at home with my family and the role that I play at church here at Seven Marks, I find myself thinking a lot these days about incentives. You know, those gestures, large and small, that help you get people motivated or challenged or inspired to more. When you want something from somebody or when you want something for somebody, incentives are a really big deal. And the truth is that when it comes to my most important relationships, like home or here at church, I want both. I want things from people and I want things for people. At home, I want things from my kids like respect and honesty and humility and curiosity. But the reason, at least ideally, that I want those things from them is because I want something for them as they grow into women. I want them to grow and to be people who love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love their neighbor as themselves. I think it's what they were made for, and I want to help them live into that. What about here at church? There's things that I want from people, like their time and commitment and generosity and sacrifice and service, but at least ideally, the reason that we want those things is because we want things for the people of this church. You see, I believe that we were made for life with God and life in community. And I want us to figure out how to do that as best we can together. Incentives are really helpful when you want to begin to teach people how to do the right things for the right reasons. But a powerful tool can also be one that's a little bit tricky to use, and such is the case with incentives. You see, just as often, they can help you teach somebody how to do the wrong thing for the right reasons, or the right thing for the wrong reasons, or yes, the wrong thing for the wrong reasons. Incentives can be pretty tricky. As any parent of young kids like myself will tell you, sugar and screen time, great incentives to get your kids to do what you want. And as fun as ice cream for breakfast is and binge watching Disney all day is, and it can help me get some of what I want from my kids now, but it will almost certainly cost me so many of the good things that I want for them later on. What about church? I mean, any good church leader will tell you that if you want to grow your church, you can through drama and spectacle. It's easy to do. In fact, over the last decade, many of the churches that have seen the most growth are the ones who have turned their weekend gatherings and their stages into a weekly download of cultural and political analysis. It's a little bit counterintuitive because at first you have to run off all the people who don't agree with you, but then all the people who stay will invite their friends because you're finally talking about something they're interested in, and you can grow your church. Or what if I said at the end of the day today, hey, for the next month, we're going to give you $1,000. Every guest you bring, $1,000. Would you do that? Would you be incentivized to bring your friends and neighbors to church with you? See, that's the thing. You got to be careful with these strategies for growth and getting bigger because it's often true that whatever you win people with is usually what you win them to. And so if you do it with the big gesture or the big show or the big personality, then chances are they will fall away when they get tired of the show or the personality. You see, incentives can give you the illusion of success sometimes without ever helping you accomplish your mission. This is the tension of incentives. They can help you get what you want, and they can ruin everything. If you were with us last week, you know that we began a brand new series called Signposts. And the big idea behind this series is we're looking at the first half of John's gospel, which is the fourth gospel narrative account of Jesus' life in your New Testament. And John's done something interesting for us in the first half of his gospel. One of the things that he did was organize the narrative flow of his story around 7 miracles that Jesus performs, or what he calls signs. And in the Greek, that word for signs means a significant act or moment or spectacle that draws people's attention to the presence or activity of God. And for our purposes, the point is these signs, they are signposts. They work like signs. They're meant to grab our attention in order to point us to something beyond themselves. That's what these signs are doing. In fact, John tells us, we looked at this last week, at the end of his gospel, he tells us this. Jesus did, many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which I didn't tell you about in this book. But the ones I did tell you about are written so that you would believe that the Messiah, the Son of God, is none other than Jesus, and that with this faith you may have life in his name. John says, yeah, there's probably a lot of good reasons to tell you about the miracles that Jesus performed, but I have one main reason in mind. I want something from you. I want you to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And I'm telling you these stories because I want something for you. I want you to have life in his name. These signs, these stories, they are incentives towards that end. In fact, we get a perfect example of this in the very first sign or miracle that Jesus performs. We talked about this a few weeks ago in our Epiphany series. Pastor Caleb taught us on Jesus when he went to Cana in Galilee and he turned the water into wine, if you remember that story. And at the end of that, in John chapter 2, we read this. This event in Cana of Galilee was the first of Jesus' signs. He displayed his glory. You want to know what these signs are for? He displayed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So there you go. Perfect example. What Jesus is on about with these signs, why John is telling us about them, so that you will believe in Jesus. Of course, last week, Pastor Paul also did a great job of showing us sometimes these incentives can go sideways. You see, the incentives are tricky. They can be missed, they can be misunderstood, they can be misapplied. And this is what happens later in John 2 with Jesus. While he was still in Jerusalem during the Passover festival, several people came to trust in his name. This is great news because they had seen the signs he did. But Jesus didn't entrust himself to them. He knew everything, and he had no need for anyone to give him information about people. He himself knew what was inside people. And it seems right from the very beginning, as we talked about last week, right from the very beginning of his ministry, Jesus has a very complicated relationship with his power. It seems at times that he almost has trouble navigating some of the incentive structures that are created through these signs and wonders. Let me give you just another example. In Mark's gospel, in chapter 8, we read this, that the Pharisees once came out and began to dispute with Jesus. They were asking him for a sign from heaven to test him out. And Jesus groaned deeply in his spirit. Why is this generation looking for a sign? He said. I'm telling you guys the truth. No sign will be given to this generation. And I want you to feel along with me the tension that I think Jesus felt every single day of his ministry. Here he is, the Son of God in human flesh, given a mission by his Father to draw all people to himself. He has the power of new creation dripping from his words and pouring out of his touch. And every day he meets and surrounds himself with people who need help. They need to be healed and they need to be saved. But Jesus quickly becomes aware of something about these signs. Sometimes they only cause people to expect more from him or even to demand more. Sometimes they cause people to look at Jesus suspiciously and to question the nature and the origin of this power, accusing him of being in league with the devil. And at the end of the day, it seems that these signs and these miracles, they're really great for drawing the crowds and building name ID, but they're not really that good for calling people to the costly life of discipleship and following Jesus. Incentives can be a really tricky thing. And so I think it is for this reason that we're told in the beginning of John chapter 4 that Jesus decides to take his guys north, to leave Jerusalem and Judea and to go north into Galilee. And John chapter 4 is where we'll be. If you want to pull it up on your phone or in your Bible, or if you have a phone, you can tap the seat back in front of you and follow along in our sermon notes, John chapter 4. And while you're getting there, a little bit of additional context. So Jesus decides to bring his disciples out of Judea and go north back to his home region of Galilee. But on the way, they go through another region called Samaria. Now, if you have any kind of church background at all, you've almost certainly heard before that the Samaritans and the Jews did not like each other, did not get along. The Jews tended to think of the Samaritans as like half-breed Jews because generations before they had intermarried with pagans and it kind of corrupted their culture and their faith and their practices. And so they don't get along. They don't like each other. The setup for this is meant to be a tense scene. And so Jesus is with his disciples, and they're going through the region of Samaria, and they stop in this village at a well. And Jesus sends his disciples on into the village to get resources, but he hangs out there. And while he's there, a woman comes out to the well to get water, and they start talking, and they have this great conversation. And by the end of the conversation, this woman's starting to think, I'm not sure if he's just a random guy at the well. I don't even think he's just a rabbi or a prophet anymore. I think he might be the Messiah. And then John tells us what happens next. The woman left her water jar, and she went into town and spoke to the people. "Come on," she said. "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. You don't think he could be the Messiah, do you?" And so she brings all of these people out with her to meet Jesus. This is chapter 4, verse 39. Several Samaritans from that town believed in Jesus because of what the woman said in evidence about him. "He told me everything I did." So when the Samaritans came to see him, they asked him to stay with them, and he did for 2 days. Many more believed because of what he said. "We believe too now," they said to the woman, "but it's no longer because of what you told us. We've heard him ourselves. We know that he really is the one. He's the Savior of the world." And I think that response is really interesting given what happened to Jesus in Jerusalem just a few passages earlier. I mean, Jerusalem, that's the capital city of Israel. That's where the Messiah, you would think, would be expected with open arms and embraced because of his message. But there, they just demand signs and wonders to impress them. And now Jesus goes into Samaria where he should be greeted with hostility and suspicion and no hospitality at all. And here it is, these people hearing the good news and believing in Jesus as Messiah. Isn't that really interesting? And so you need that in the back of your mind, these experiences that Jesus is having, as we come now to our key passage for today, to the second sign, which is chapter 4, verse 43 and following. After 2 days in Samaria, Jesus went off from there into Galilee. Jesus himself gave evidence, after all, that a prophet isn't honored in his own country. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him. Let's pause right there because that actually kind of sounds strange on first reading, doesn't it? John's saying, hey, a prophet like Jesus, they're never shown the respect that they deserve when they go to their hometown. And let me give you an example. When we went to Galilee, everybody welcomed us with open arms. It's like, really? That doesn't sound like those two things connect together. And so John gives us this extra little detail. These people that came out, they were the ones who had seen the things he had done in Jerusalem at the festival, since they had been at the festival too. And so many of these people who've come out to greet Jesus, they've already seen him do signs and miracles in Jerusalem, or they are friends of people who have seen these things. And so when they come out to see Jesus, it's not because here's the Messiah, let's go worship him or anything like that. It's, oh my gosh, he's about to put on another show. It might be better this time. It might be bigger. They have come to see the show. They have not come to see the Messiah. Continue on. They had seen all the things that he had done at the festival since they had been with them. And so Jesus went once more into Cana in Galilee, where he had turned the water into wine. That was the first sign. And there in Cana was a royal official who had come from Capernaum because his son was ill. He had heard that Jesus had come from Judea into Galilee, and he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, since he was at the point of death. And Jesus responds, unless you see signs and miracles, you won't ever believe. Let's pause again, because doesn't that also sound kind of strange? This guy's coming to Jesus and asking for help, and it kind of sounds like Jesus is like blowing him up for it and accusing him in some sense. Like, what's going on with that? Well, you may not recognize, or you may not know this, but in English, you almost certainly know this. In English, we have a singular you and a plural you, and you cannot distinguish them in a sentence. But it doesn't work like that in Greek, and it actually doesn't work like that in the South, where we say you for singular and Y'all, yes. So verse 48, this is not a you singular verse. This is a y'all verse. Jesus is looking out at this crowd of people and saying, y'all will not believe until y'all see signs and wonders. But says John, there was one guy in this crowd of people, this royal official. He probably worked in Herod's court and lives in Capernaum. That's about 15 or 20 miles away from Cana. And he also came down and was part of this crowd of people who wanted to see Jesus. And his son was near death. Now here's the question. How desperate are you, if your child is near death, to leave him laying in his bed, walk 15 or 20 miles away, to maybe, possibly, hopefully, bump into a healer that somebody told you about who had come from Jerusalem into Galilee? And maybe, just maybe, if you can get his attention in this crowd of people, maybe he will come back with you 15 or 20 miles. And then maybe, just maybe, he'll be able to heal your son. The question is, how desperate is this person? And the answer is about as desperate as a human being gets. And so Jesus looks out at this crowd and says, you guys, you will never believe unless you get a sign. And this man cries out, sir, come down now before my child dies. And Jesus looks at him and says, off you go. Your son will live. And then John tells us this. The man believed the word which Jesus had spoken to him. And he set off. What must have been going through his head when he walked away? As he gets miles down the road, is he thinking to himself, man, I'm an official. I should have pushed harder. I should have taken him with me. I should have paid him to come with me. Or you start to think like, I don't know, that was pretty dumb. That was kind of a waste of time. What was I thinking? Or with every step he's taking, is he walking along thinking to himself, hanging as if his whole universe depends on every single word that Jesus has just said to him, your son will live. Fortunately, he didn't have to wonder very long because before he could even get home, John finishes the story this way. While he was still on his way down to Capernaum, his servants met him with the news that his son was alive and well. Good news. So he asked them, what time had he begun to get better? Yesterday afternoon, about 1 o'clock, they said, that's when the fever left him. And so the father knew that it had happened at the very moment when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. He himself believed, and so did all of his household. This was the second sign Jesus did when he came out of Judea into Galilee. If I'm being perfectly honest with you, I found this story really perplexing this week as I was studying. Because at first blush, it's not immediately clear to me what makes this official so different from everybody else in the crowd. I mean, he's there to see Jesus, yes, but not because he believes he's the Messiah or because he's there to worship. He's actually not that different from the others. He's come because he needs a miracle. He's come because he wants to see a sign. He's come because he has heard that Jesus can do strange and powerful things. It seems the only thing that really makes him different from the crowd is how desperate he is to get a miracle. And so then I start thinking, surely there were other desperate people in that crowd. Surely there were other people in that crowd who, if they had gotten a sign like he did, they would have believed just like he did. And then it's really easy to spiral from there, right? Because you start asking yourselves questions like, well, why this sign and not another? Why this person and not another? Well, what about signs and miracles and wonders today? What about the miracle that I needed back then? What about the one that I need right now? What about it? And so this royal official, man, he is grinding as he tries to put his trust and faith in Jesus. But are we being told this story because we're supposed to be like the royal official? I mean, Am I just not desperate enough when I ask for these things? Am I not humble enough? Am I not bold enough? Is it about more faith? Like, what is the thing here? And as these unanswerable questions swirl for us, or at least for me, it's not long before I realize that I have fallen into the very trap that Jesus was so concerned about and that John was so eager to warn us about. I have become too focused on the incentives. I have become too focused on the signs and not enough on what they are pointing us to. The signs are signposts pointing us on to Jesus. The point of this story, like the rest that we'll look at in the series, is not to tease us or to make us jealous or to make us wonder why we can't get something similar. It's not to make us think that, well, if I could just be more like the royal official, then maybe Jesus would move in my direction and do something like that. I don't even think the point of this story is to make us think that miracles and signs are some kind of normative expectation in the lives of followers of Jesus in all times and all places. I think the point of this story, as John told us from the beginning, is to point us to Jesus, to grow our confidence that he is who he said he was, and that he will do all that he has promised to accomplish. I love this quote from Tish Warren. She says, "For all the healings Jesus accomplished, he barely moved the needle on the number of lepers in the ancient Near East, or the number of women hemorrhaging, or the number of people who died. But through his work, Jesus showed us what the kingdom of God looks like. In that kingdom, people are healed. They are forgiven. They are restored, and they are made whole." And this is why it's worth remembering here. The royal official and his son in this story, they have been dead now for 2,000 years. We don't even know their names. Which means the point of this story, the hope of this story, is not the sign. It is the one that the sign is pointing us to. It is Jesus. And so the question as we read these miracle stories is not so much, how do I become the kind of person who can get a sign from God? The question today, and for the rest of the series, and indeed for the rest of our lives, is how do I become the kind of person who can recognize and respond to the signs that are pointing me to Jesus? But having said all of that, I don't want us to have the impression as we leave here today that there's nothing we should learn from this official and from this story. I mean, I want to take seriously the fact that in a crowd full of people who are clamoring to see a sign in order to believe, Jesus singles out the one guy who is willing to hear and believe, sign unseen. And that's the guy who gets the sign that enables him to believe all the more. Seven Marks Church, John has told us this story because he wants to help us believe all the more. The Jesus in this story is the one that you and I are invited to know personally, intimately, completely, one day at a time for a lifetime. Which is why I'm 100% sure as I stand in this room and look at you and talk to those of you online, I am certain when I say that whoever you are and whatever's going on in your world right now, Jesus sees you. He knows you. He knows your heart. He knows what you need, and he knows what you want before you even ask. And I am certain that like this official from this story, Jesus hears you. You need not fear that your voice is being drowned out by the crowd. You need not fear that Jesus is too busy, too distracted, or too distant to help you. Like everyone in John chapter 4 learns, Jesus is capable of far more than we could ask or think. And he cares about you. And he has good intentions towards you. And so as we conclude our gathering today, there's a lot more that I wish I had time to say about signs and miracles and wonders. I'm really glad we have 5 more weeks to talk about it. But as we close today, I want to give you a couple of really simple, practical reflections to walk out of here with. And the first is simply this: ask. If you find yourself in a season where you need a miracle, ask. Absolutely ask Jesus. 2 things can be true at the same time, you know. Jesus doesn't owe us any signs, but he loves when we ask him. He loves when we bring our needs and our concerns and our desires to him because he delights in giving us the kingdom. He delights to give his children good blessings. He delights to give us little signposts, little pointers to new creation and to our ultimate future against the day where we won't need those signs anymore because we will see him face to face. So if you need a miracle, ask. And might I encourage you, as everybody stands in just a moment to sing, that you find your way back to our prayer corner where someone would love to mourn with those who mourn and to celebrate with those who celebrate and to petition with those who need help. What an appropriate prayer for the people of God to pray as they gather today. Help me, Jesus. But of course, not everybody in here finds themselves in a season where they're desperate, where a miracle is a make or break for you. And so my encouragement to you this week would be to be on the lookout. And what I mean by that is you should work hard this week to look out for, to pay attention to the signs of the activity and the presence of God in your life that we simply take for granted. A question that has haunted me the last week or so, and so I'll share it with you, is this. What am I taking for granted right now that someone else is praying desperately for? What are the signs in my life all around me that are pointing me to Jesus that I'm just taking for granted and someone else is desperately praying for an intervention? I think questions like that, they help us see all of life for what it actually is. A miracle, a gift, a signpost, pointing us to the author of life. His name is Jesus. 2,000 years ago, a royal official came to him because his son was dying and he needed help. And one day Jesus will do that for all of creation. So behold him, believe him, worship him.